So welcome everyone to this Hong Kong Sustainable Seafood Coalition webinar. This is the final webinar for the year, and we have run a series of these throughout this year, all of which are available on the Hong Kong Sustainable Seafood Coalition website if you'd like to view them. And today we're going to take a look at the new seafood risk assessment website that has been developed for the Hong Kong market. And at the same time, we're going to hear from experts about the local aquaculture situation in Hong Kong, as well as the practice of capture-based aquaculture, which is an important and essential part of the aquaculture industry and commonly practiced in the region, but with some significant concerns to be aware of. And our Hong Kong Sustainable Seafood Coalition members also recently asked us to dig deeper and look into certain species of interest, and one of them is Barramundi, Asian sea bass. So we also have an expert who's going to be speaking to us about that today. So we have an excellent lineup of speakers, but before I introduce them, I just wanted to cover a few housekeeping rules for everyone, which is about the HKSSC webinars and how we run these. Okay, I'm just going to try and move this slide on. Aaron, I might need your help there. There we go. Okay, so slides will be shared with everyone. If you or anyone who requests them, please do write to our secretariat at info@hkssc.org. The webinar will be uploaded onto the HKSSC website. We also have a YouTube channel, so you can go and view all our past webinars there. All of our meetings and webinars are run on Chatham House rules. So we protect individual identities by you typing in your question into the question box. So your identity won't be known. So please don't be shy to ask questions. And we really, really do encourage you to ask many questions today, because we have an excellent panel of experts who have a wealth of experience in the region. So please do ask questions. We'll have our presentations first, and then we'll follow with a Q&A at the end. So keep all your questions for the end, but you can type them into the question box as we go along. Okay, great. So I'm just going to see if I can move on to the next slide. Aaron, it seems that it's, I don't know if you want to give me back my slide functionality. Otherwise, is it working for me? Okay. For some reason it's not. Oh, there we go. Okay, great. So it seems that I do have the functionality again. Okay, so just going back to that slide on the speakers. So we're going to do things slightly different today. Instead of me introducing all the speakers to you, I'm going to get the speakers to introduce themselves and to also give us a very brief introduction to what they're going to cover today. So I'm going to first pass over to Alex Kaveen. Alex, please go ahead and give us a little background to yourself and what you're going to be talking about today.
Okay, thanks very much, Jackie. So I work for an organisation called Our Standards. So I lead their fisheries workstream, and we typically work in partnership with our clients, supplement development of their seafood responsible sourcing programmes. So we do quite a lot of work with third-party standards and certification schemes, and also organisations like the Hong Kong SSC as well. So prior to joining our standards, I worked for the Seafish Industry Authority in the UK and was responsible for developing their seafood risk assessment tool, also called RAS, which is a risk assessment website. Again, which this new website for the Hong Kong seafood market is an evolution of. So yeah, that's my background in a nutshell. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Alex. And Alex is going to be talking to us today about the new seafood risk assessment website and the development of that, the methodology and the profiles of the species. Okay, thanks, Alex. And then I'm going to hand over to our second speaker for today, Dominic Bretel from the AFCD. Please go ahead, Dominic.
So yeah, thank you very much for the introduction, Jackie. So my name is Dominic, and I'm a fisheries officer at the AFCD. To those who aren't familiar with the work of the AFCD, we provide services to the public in connection with agriculture and fisheries, nature conservation, and animal, plant, and fisheries regulation. Within the role in the department, I primarily support ongoing promotions of local fisheries products and ongoing opportunities to facilitate demand for sustainable seafood. Prior to joining the government, I'd worked in the private sector in a consultancy capacity, and I've also worked in various roles in universities and tertiary institutions. The topic that I'll be presenting on today will be the local fisheries context in Hong Kong and some of the ongoing work that we're doing in this area within the government.
Excellent. Thank you, Dominic. It's really, really good to have you on the panel. And the AFCD, for anyone outside of Hong Kong, is the Department of Agriculture, Forestry and Conservation Department, right? AFCD, yeah.
Agriculture,
okay.
Fisheries and Conservation.
Sorry, Agriculture, Fisheries and Conservation Department. Yeah, Agriculture, Fisheries, Conservation Department. Okay, and Yvonne Sadovi, I would like to pass over to you now, please.
Okay, thank you, Jackie, very much. So hello, everybody. My name Yvonne Sadovi, and I've been affiliated. I've been working with the University of Hong Kong for over 25 years, and I still have an affiliation there in an honorary position. And my work mainly concentrated on the biology of fishes, particularly tropical species, in Southeast Asia and the Pacific. And then before that, I was in the Caribbean, and I was the director of the Government Fishery Research Lab in Puerto Rico. So I've had sort of the fishery side of things and the biology side of things. And in addition to that, I work with IUCN, I've worked with FAO, and I've done work with CITES on CITES listed species. And today what I'm going to talk about is what's called capture-based aquaculture, and all will be revealed.
Excellent. Thank you, Yvonne. Wonderful to have you here. And our final speaker today will be Jose Domingos. I'm going to pass over to Jose to introduce himself. Thanks, Jose.
Thank you, Jackie, for inviting me to this webinar. It's very exciting. So today I will be talking about Barramundi, which is one of my favorite fish species for tropical aquaculture. And also just to give a brief introduction about red snapper, which is a new species starting to be farmed. I work for the Tropical Futures Institute. It's a new institute of James Cook University that we have a branch campus here in Singapore, and where I have been for the last 3 years. I have also been to Hong Kong for 1.5 years, working for City University of Hong Kong last 18 months. So like on a dual role. So I know a little bit about what's happening in Hong Kong in terms of aquaculture. And prior to that, I worked as a farm manager in Brazil with shrimp farming for many years, and also worked in Australia for the Department of Agriculture and Fisheries, managing some R&D projects with marine food fish.
Excellent. Thanks. Thank you so much, Jose. So we have a wealth of experience on our panel today. All of these individuals have been involved in our seafood risk assessment website somehow, either as part of the assessment team or have been peer reviewers or sense checking some of the information which we have in our species profile. So it's really wonderful to have them join us today. Okay, and I will kick off giving a little bit of background to the Seafood Risk Assessment website, why it came about, the idea of the project, and who essentially has been involved. So I'm the technical advisor at the Hong Kong Sustainable Seafood Coalition. I've been involved there. I'm also on the steering committee. For the past 3 years, I've been involved there since the inception of the idea of having a coalition. And I used to work and live in Hong Kong. I worked for the seafood industry for a number of years, living in Hong Kong for 10 years in total. And then I transitioned back to Cape Town more recently, 5 years ago, in fact. And I also spent time working for a local advisory firm here called Insight. Okay, so let me get to the background to the coalition, the Seafood Risk Assessment website. And I want to give you a little bit of background to why we came up with this idea. So let's recap on what the vision for the Hong Kong Sustainable Seafood Coalition is. For all seafood imported into Hong Kong to be legal, traceable, and biologically sustainable. And I've highlighted biologically sustainable there because the focus of our seafood risk assessment website is really on the biological sustainability of the fish being traded into Hong Kong. And so this is what our members at the HKSSC are committing to. There are a number of companies in Hong Kong trading in seafood that are willing to buy and purchase more sustainable seafood species, but we found that there's a struggle in getting access to information and also identifying the risk of the biological sustainability risk of species coming into Hong Kong. And it doesn't necessarily mean that information is not available, it's just not readily available and not necessarily open source. So we wanted to make it much easier for Hong Kong seafood traders to be able to move towards this biological sustainability trajectory. Hence, we came up with this idea of let's launch something where we can profile species and make it open access and affordable for any person trading in seafood in Hong Kong. So we looked to the RS standards because I had met Alex Kaveen during my years of working in the industry, and I also came to find out that Alex had been involved in the Seafish RAS website development, risk assessment for seafood sourcing, which we felt was a very useful website and a very useful methodology for risk assessing seafood as well. So we started speaking to Alex, and we also started looking at what were our possible options that we could look at. And we decided, okay, we wanted to develop an online source of very detailed information that is readily available to the Hong Kong marketplace about the sustainability criteria and risk rating of the seafood they buy. And the key focus was really to keep these as rapid assessments. So we're talking about, say, 2 to 3 days to do an assessment by a researcher. And the reason for this is to keep it affordable. So there's almost no excuse for a company not being able to find out or dig deeper into the sustainability risk of the species that they're sourcing. So that's really the objective of that was behind the Seafood Risk Assessment website. We looked at examples. So Seafish RAS was a great example for us. And Alex spoke us through, you know, all the different elements that one can find on the Seafish RAS website. And we decided, well, we want our scoring categories to align to the HKSSC Code of Conduct, because then it would make it easier for our members to make a quick decision on where this falls in terms of low, medium, high risk. We also decided it would be nice to have detailed information, if possible, or some information on what fisheries improvement projects or aquaculture improvement work was happening. So we wanted the website to capture that kind of information as well. So we aimed for a local solution, so to work with Hong Kong University professors, Yvonne Sadovi being one of them, students and consultants alongside the RS standards. As I mentioned, there wasn't readily much information available. There are few sustainability assessments of the seafood eaten in Hong Kong and being traded, bearing in mind a large majority or a big portion of seafood traded into Hong Kong actually gets re-exported into China. And so this is really to bring academics to work closer with the industry and working with local academic institutions in Hong Kong to keep it collaborative and cost effective. Ideally, long term, we want the Hong Kong Sustainable Seafood Coalition members plus the wider Hong Kong community industry to approach us and say, if there's a particular fish species that hasn't been profiled yet on any of the risk assessments available in the world, then can the Seafood Risk Assessment site do this for us? And seed funding was provided by ADM Capital Foundation, Swire Charitable Trust, and the Estee Lauder Foundation. So that's just a little bit of background to that. In terms of who was involved, we have 3 committees at the HKSSC. One of the committees is our Sustainability Risk Assessment Committee, which includes Benjamin So from 178 Degrees. We've got Cesar there from M&C Asia, and Makiko as well from Indogunu Lordley. She's in charge of the Seafood Gems brand, Ocean Gems, it's called her brand, for Indogunu Lordley Company. We also had Stephen Chan. He's been very involved in helping to advise us locally on the farming situation in Hong Kong. He's from Aquaculture Technologies Asia, but also the veterinary consultant for the City University Aquatic Veterinary Ambulatory Services, which is a free veterinary service for Hong Kong farmers. So, and our Sustainability Risk Assessment Committee was very important in terms of giving us guidance on types of species to profile, and also gaining some extra information like seasonality, for example. And then our assessment team is Alex Kaveen from RS Standards. We have Honorary Professor Yvonne Sadovi from HKU. Lobi Howe is a PhD candidate at HKU. And Heather Sadusky from the University of Maine. She's coordinating an aquaculture hub there at the University of Maine. She helped us with our farmed species profiles. Okay, so that's the assessment team. And that's a little bit of background to us. Here is the website to the seafood risk assessment website, so seafoodriskassessment.hk. You can just copy that down now and plug it into your little search icon right now, and you can have a look at the website as we go along. And now I'm going to pass over to Alex, who's going to give us a very good in-depth look at the methodology behind this and the profile, the species profiled. Thanks, Alex.
Okay, well, thanks so much.
I'll also just ask all the other speakers, we'll just turn off our cameras for now while Alex presents, and then we'll come back on. Okay.
Okay, well, thanks so much, Jackie, for the introduction. So without repeating too much of what Jackie has already said, the work is a result of the combination of my experience working on the Seafish Risk Assessment for Sourcing Seafood website. I'd just like to acknowledge the other contributions from the wider project team of fisheries and aquaculture experts, Hong Kong seafood businesses, Cheddar Media, who developed the website, and ADM Capital Foundation, who were the project sponsor. So I'd just like to say a big thank you, really, to everybody involved in the project, and I'm delighted today to finally showcase the website. If my presentation will go down. Have I got control, Jackie?
Aaron, I'm going to pass that back to you to give Alex control.
You might need to click your mouse first. That goes for the same
Right,
to claim control.
Let's see if it works.
It does take some time. It's a little bit of a delay sometimes.
Okay, well, fingers crossed. Yeah, for some reason it's not playing ball today. Ah, here we go. It's a bit of a delay, so yeah. Okay, so the main purpose today is to demonstrate the Seafood Risk Assessment website, but I'll start by quickly providing a bit more additional context on why we undertook this project, just building on what Jackie's already said, and showcase the species we've profiled to date as well. So in terms of the theory of change for this project, the key aim of the project was to develop a method to assess the environmental risks associated with some wild capture and aquaculture species found in the Hong Kong seafood market. So this initial list of species was directed by input from the steering group and wider Hong Kong SSC members. We also additionally have developed supply questions to act as further prompts for seafood buyers to conduct due diligence of their supply chains as well. And we hope that following the launch of the website, this will provide the Hong Kong industry with a common baseline of facts from which priorities for fisheries and aquaculture improvements can be identified going forward. So why a new risk assessment method when there are several seafood risk assessment guides and tools already existing? So market context is key here, and the risk assessment method we developed is bespoke for the needs of the Hong Kong seafood industry. In particular, we needed to develop an approach that could provide an indication of risk in data limited fisheries, provide a single score aligned with the Hong Kong SSC sourcing code of conduct requirements that Jackie's already mentioned, and also ensure that the risk summary information on the website could be translated into traditional Chinese as well, which this will happen following the launch of the website today. So this risk assessment method was not developed in isolation, but with consultation with Hong Kong fisheries and aquaculture experts and wider industry stakeholders. So we developed two risk assessment methods, one for wild capture fisheries and one for farm species. So I don't want to go into the technical details too much, but fundamentally the wild capture approach is essentially a modified version of a well-established risk assessment method called productivity susceptibility analysis. And we adapted this for the typical biology and fisheries context for many of the species being found in the Hong Kong seafood market. So Yvonne will probably go into a bit more detail on this in her presentation, but the live reef fish trade is certainly a big player in this market. So there are two scoring pathways, the PSA for data limited fisheries and one for species that have a stock assessment. So each scoring pathway also takes into account the impacts on the target species, fisheries management information and general environmental impacts on the main capture methods. So generally for most species, a single risk score is produced at a country level, and this is aligned with the Hong Kong SSC sourcing code of conduct. And this is highlighting any key differences in country level fisheries management, essentially. So if you want to go through the actual assessment method in more detail, it can be accessed from the homepage on the website and downloadable as a PDF document. So with the aquaculture risk assessment, we assess 7 criteria, and we typically generalize on the typical impacts of production for farm species in a particular country or region. Again, a single risk score for each country is shown on the website for each country. By default, any farms in a credible third-party aquaculture certification scheme will be considered a low risk. And yeah, sorry, I should have said that this also holds true for wild capture fisheries also. So we profiled 16 species today. So this was driven by initial interest from Hong Kong SSC members. They were also chosen to ensure that levels of available information differed between profiles in order to develop and test the risk assessment method. And the assessment team used publicly available information sources, supplemented by some consultation with in-country fisheries management and aquaculture experts. And going forward, we certainly would welcome feedback on the initial profiles we've got, and we want to try and build on this network of expertise we've been using to ensure that key information on the source country fisheries management practices and aquaculture production informs sourcing decisions in the Hong Kong marketplace. So I think feedback from people is really going to be key to developing this tool and approach going forward. So without further ado, I'll get onto the website now. So we've been working on the website. Cheddar Media have been the web developer and done a really great job. So this will basically host the risk assessment information, and we're in down a position to launch it today. So this is the landing page you can see now, and this provides general background information to the project, a search tool. Just keep in mind that there are only 16 species profiles on the website at the moment, but we'll hope to expand this content going forward. The best way of actually viewing the profile content at a minute is to go to the fish lookup tab in the top right hand corner of the page. So this is what the fish lookup looks like. We've got 16 species on, and it's the most straightforward way of viewing the seafood species that have been risk assessed to date. The function bar on the left allows the user to filter by IUCN status, production method, and country and risk level. I'm conscious of time, though. I'll just spend a bit of time taking you through the content for giant grouper to give you a feel for the level of information we have on the website. At the top of each profile page, we have the alternative common names for profile species and also the traditional and simplified Chinese. For full transparency, we also state the assessment organisation and whether each profile has been peer reviewed. The green and red counter in the top right corner of the page indicates that some countries have been scored a high risk and some countries are low risk with respect to the production of giant grouper. And I'll, in a few subsequent slides, I'll going to show you what we've done for the country level risk assessments. I think just it's worth pointing out we have tried to be as comprehensive as possible with the naming conventions because we know that this is certainly an issue in terms of buyers of particular seafood species using different naming conventions. So hopefully that will try and simplify things going forward for people. So if we go down, so if you scroll down the web page, the next section you'll come across is the overview section. This is detail and general information relating to the production of the species. So we've got a tab on the general information on the key production methods, as you can see there, the giant grouper. And also we've added this functionality called supplier questions. So we put this section in basically to act as prompts received through buyers to ask their suppliers on what they know about the production of a species. We envisage this will hopefully help procurement teams gather evidence to provide great levels of assurance that any potential risks are being properly managed, and hopefully just foster that or facilitate the transfer of information through the supply chain as well, or at least make a start on that and getting people, buyers in industry, to critically think of the risks in terms of the production areas and types of capture method that are being used to produce and capture the fish. So for each species profile, we've broken it down by country at the risk assessment. So each main production country is then profiled and summary information provided. And this summary information will provide a justification for the risk score at a fairly high level in terms of what the key issues are that are driving the risk. So clicking on the Learn More tab, just at the bottom of each profile summary, will open up the full assessment in a PDF document. And in the PDF, you'll see how each of the assessment criteria have been scored for the species for full and country for full transparency. So I think that just about takes me to the end of the presentation. So thanks again very much for listening, and we hope you find the website useful. And again, just emphasize we would welcome any feedback on the tool as well. Thank you.
Excellent, thank you, Alex. I'm just going to get my webcam back on. Thank you very much for that overview. And again, we'll have a slide right at the end of the presentation with the website link again, in case you missed that earlier. For now, I'm going to be passing over to Dominic, who's going to give us some insights into what's happening locally in Hong Kong on the aquaculture scene. So Alex, you can just bring your webcam up and we will disappear. Or rather, Dominic. Okay.
Great. Thank you very much, Jackie. So as Jackie mentioned, today I'll be presenting on the sustainable local produce that we have under the Accredited Fish Farm Scheme, AFFS in Hong Kong. So the objective of today's presentation really is just to run through some of the local fisheries context in Hong Kong. And in the second part of the presentation, I'll go over some details about the AFFS scheme and how it's contributing towards sustainable development of the fisheries industry in Hong Kong. So the government policy on fisheries is to conserve the fisheries resources in local waters and to promote the sustainable development of the fisheries industry, with an ultimate view to maintain a steady supply of fresh fish to local consumers. Under this policy, the AFCD Fisheries Branch has four main functions: providing technical and financial support to fishermen in Hong Kong, enforcing legislation to regulate the fishing industry, planning and implementing suitable projects and measures to conserve fisheries resources, and providing administrative support to the fish marketing organization. And I'll be speaking more about the fish marketing organization towards the end of the presentation. In Hong Kong, we have two main types of aquaculture farming practices, pond fish culture and marine fish culture. Pond fish farms cover approximately 1,100 hectares of land in Hong Kong. And in 2019, production amounted to over 2,200 tons of produce. Most pond fish farms in Hong Kong practice a polyculture of carps mixed with grey mullet, tilapia, and jade perch. And for marine fish farms, they cover approximately 200 hectares in Hong Kong. And in 2019, production amounted to over just under 900 tons. Commonly cultured species in marine fish farms include fish such as groupers, pomfrets, snappers, sea breams, and cobia. In terms of the geographical distribution of fish farms, marine fish farms are located in designated fish culture zones around Hong Kong, of which there are currently 26 under the Marine Fish Culture Ordinance. Fish ponds are located in the northwestern part of the New Territories, as shown in the blue area in this map, and oyster farms are located in Deep Bay, just adjacent to it in the red part of the map. When it comes to the management approach, a systematic science-based fisheries management approach is adopted, whereby parameters like tidal flushing, nutrient loading from fish farms, water quality indicators are monitored, and these are fed into a model to assess if farming activity at a particular site is operated in an environmentally acceptable manner, or to decide how intensive or extensive farming activity has to be in order to be sustainable. The AFCD introduced the Voluntary Accredited Fish Farm Scheme, or AFFS, in 2005 in a bid to enhance the environmental hygiene standards of local aquaculture farms and the quality of aquaculture products. Participating farms under the scheme are required to adopt a set of good aquaculture practices. We currently have 73 marine fish farms and 64 freshwater fish farms registered under the scheme. And by number, this represents approximately 1/10 of fish farms in Hong Kong, and by cultured area, just under 1/4. And these are just a number of products that we have cultured under the scheme. So we have grey mullet, jade perch, pompano, green grouper, giant grouper, red snapper. And you'll see that for the fish pictured on the slide here, that they all have, you'll see that they have tags just on the fins or on the bodies, and I'll be speaking more about this later on in the presentation. Ultimately, AFCD's vision is to see our community enjoy a reliable and plentiful supply of safe and high quality fresh food and a well-managed natural environment, which we can pass on to our future generations. With regard to the AFFS, we strive to ensure the compliance, traceability, and biological sustainability of products sold under the scheme, which are key elements of HKSSC's vision, as Jackie ran through earlier on in today's webinar. And I'll just be going through each of these elements in a bit more detail with you all. So from a compliance perspective, besides being required to adhere to fish farm licensing conditions, AFFS applicants are required to uphold and meet conditions set out in the AFFS handbook. 2 levels of inspections take place to ensure that requirements have been met for participating fish farms. So on the one level, we have an initial inspection of fish farms that register for the scheme. And for those that have successfully registered under the scheme, regular inspections take place to ensure that their ongoing compliance. Amongst the requirements set out in the manual, maintaining good farm hygiene and good farm management practices are expected from registered fish farms. And these cover elements such as monitoring fish health and water quality, disinfecting tools and gear, appropriate use of feed additives, and so on and so forth. And the quality assurance system is a key factor contributing to consumer confidence towards AFFS products. The examination comprises 2 levels, the regular monitoring of farms and the testing of aquatic products before sale. So water and fish samples are collected from farms for bacterial testing and screened for microbes such as E. coli and V. cholerae, and other parameters such as heavy metals, antibiotic residues, and the presence of malachite green are checked prior to going out to market. Transparency and traceability have never been more important to consumers when it comes to food. And farm-to-table traceability, beginning from the registration of fry, rearing of fish, and up to the sale of products, is implemented. Products must pass all quality assurance tests before they can be sold with the AFFS label. And through scanning a QR code unique to the product, consumers can obtain information relating to the origin of the product, quality assurance tests that have been conducted and passed, and other relevant background information relating to the farm or the AFFS scheme. And through implementing the AFFS scheme, the AFCD aims to ensure the long-term biological sustainability of local fish stocks. And the AFFS handbook is periodically updated with reference to international standards and guidelines. I'm sorry, the presentation is jumping around a bit.
Sorry, Dominic, I'm not quite sure what happened. Maybe just click back up. Oh, it seems to have gone to the end. I think Aaron maybe can help you just to get it back up to the beginning. Not quite sure how that happened. No, don't worry, don't worry. This is the risk we take when we give, we allow the speakers to flip through the slides, but it does make it more efficient ultimately. So don't worry, we'll just get back to your slide there. There we go. Okay.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. Yeah, so through implementing the AFFS scheme, the AFCD aims to ensure the long-term biological sustainability of local fish stocks. And the AFFS handbook is periodically updated with reference to international standards and guidelines, such as the FAO and technical guidelines and aquaculture certification and other relevant standards and guidelines. So ultimately, so we understand that the HKSSC, they do have an emphasis on the legality, traceability, and biological sustainability of products. And this covers, to a large extent, seafood imported into Hong Kong. Where the AFFS scheme comes in is into driving demand for local seafood produce. And actually, there are a number of benefits to choosing local produce, which we'd just like to highlight in the following slide. So Hong Kong, as we all know, has one of the highest per capita seafood consumption rates in the world, at over 3 times the global average. To meet this demand, much of the fisheries produce in Hong Kong is imported. Based on 2019 data, production from local pond fish farms in Hong Kong accounted for approximately 4% of freshwater fish consumed. And production from mariculture farms and capture fisheries accounted for approximately 20% of seafood consumed. The rest is all imported. Nonetheless, local production still makes an important contribution to the overall supply. And there are a number of benefits to procuring local produce when given the opportunity to. For example, there are potentially shorter lead and transportation times when sourcing local fish, lower carbon footprints associated with storage, processing, and transportation, reduce reliance and dependence on imported produce, lower legal, reputational, and food safety risks to local supply chains, and importantly, you'll be supporting local farmers, businesses, and communities along the value chain. On this front, the seafood industry, including seafood suppliers, buyers, restaurants, retailers, and some of you who have joined the webinar today, play a vital role in steering the city toward sustainable, compliant, ethically sourced seafood, traceable to the farm of origin, and educating consumers about best choices to facilitate demand for sustainable seafood. When fish are ready to go to market, AFFS fish farms can sell produce themselves directly, or they could utilize the services of the fish marketing organization to distribute their wares. And the fish marketing organization, to give you some background information, is a self-financing non-profit organization, and is subject to the Marine Fish Marketing Ordinance. It operates 7 wholesale fish markets in Hong Kong, and it has processing facilities to sort, process, package, store, and transport products around Hong Kong. And AFFS products are available for purchase as chilled or frozen products. And they're sold in packaging which is quite distinguishable from other produce that you might see in retail points around Hong Kong. AFFS products are sold at over 110 retail distribution points across Hong Kong, as well as at markets, restaurants, hotels, online stores, and the local Fresh app. A link to it, which I'll share with you in the next slide. And marketing promotions of AFFS products are run at various trade shows throughout the year, exhibitions, and we also have a Sunday weekend bazaar at Sai Kung, which unfortunately due to COVID has stopped at the moment. But for those who are interested, we have a booth that runs on Sundays from 11 to 5 p.m. Where AFFS products and various information and guides to the local fishing situation is available to browse and look at in Sai Kung. So here's the, I'd like to just end with the slide here, because we have a QR code links just on the bottom right-hand side. So we have an Apple Store app here, and we have an Android, Google Play Store app here. So if you scan the QR codes, you can access the local Fresh app, an app which is operated and administered by the Fish Marketing Organization. And it's a one-click store really, because you can access it, you can browse, and you can purchase all AFFS registered products in Hong Kong. Thank you very much for those that have joined the webinar today, and I hope you came out of it with a better understanding of the local fishery situation and the AFFS program in Hong Kong. Thank you.
Thanks, Dominic. Very, very interesting and very useful as well to get that overview, especially some of the statistics on what is locally certified AFFS at the moment, and also to hear of the rigor, I suppose, that you guys are applying to this. And it would be nice to hear later on, perhaps during the Q&A, what plans there are for the future to try and get more certified products in Hong Kong, and how the private sector can be of help in that. Great, so now I'm going to be passing over to Yvonne Sadovi, who's going to give us a very nice overview of what is capture-based aquaculture and why we should be aware of this, particularly in the region. Please go ahead, Yvonne.
Okay, thank you, Jackie. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can hear you perfectly.
Yes, okay, great. So hello everybody, good morning, afternoon, wherever you are. I'm going to talk about a component of aquaculture which is probably not so well understood, but what I hope to be able to convince you and show you is why it is important for many of the kind of typical seafoods that we see for sale, and that yourselves might be involved in trading. So if you look at, okay, I have to remember that there's a lag. What I'm going to show you now is a graph which comes from, hang on just a second, which comes from FAO, and it shows data, it will show data here from 1950 on the left to about 2016 on the right, and it's just divided into two parts. It shows the volume or weight of fisheries, and it shows divided into capture fisheries in the orange below and aquaculture production in the blue above. And there's just a couple of points I want to make about this. The first is that you'll see that with the orange, which are the wild capture fisheries where people go out and actually catch fish, increased quite substantially until about the 1980s, and then leveled off. And the reason it leveled off, it became a kind of a fairly flat line, is because we have essentially reached the capacity of our waterways around the world, our oceans around the world, to give us fish, the natural productivity limits. Okay, so in other words, it's unlikely that we're going to get more from capture fisheries, and what we are hoping to do is just to be able to sustain, to keep that plateau and keep those fisheries producing into the future. But if you look at the blue on top, you can see a very rapid increase in the aquaculture, and that has partly been enabled us to address the increase in demand and need for seafood, and of course address the fact that we can't get more from the sea. Now, the way these graphs are usually expressed depicts them, shows them, indicates that they are very separate. But in fact, when we go to the next graph, what you'll see is, in fact, they're very closely linked. And there's in fact a lot of linkage between capture fisheries and aquaculture, some of which you may be aware of and others maybe not so aware of. But these are very important from a sustainability, a biological sustainability point of view. And I have, Aaron, I have pushed the button several times. So let me just see. I'm not able to, there we go, this is the next one. So the idea here is there's actually quite a lot of linkage between these two fish production sectors. And this is what I want to explain, why that is. So the next slide, which I hope will come soon, is a definition of aquaculture. And this is from FAO, so that's the United Nations Food and Aquaculture Organization. And essentially it talks about the rearing of aquatic animals, including plants, which involves part of the process in private ownership. And now it doesn't indicate what the source of those animals or plants that you rear come from. In other words, where they come from. It just talks about a period in private ownership. And then there are two types of aquaculture which are recognized. The first is hatchery based, and this is where you're maybe spawning or raising individuals in captivity, producing the eggs and the larvae, and then those are grown out in captivity until they reach market size. So that has, in that respect, very little link for a lot of species to wild. Hatchery is used to produce the animals that are then cultured. But the second type is what I want to talk about, which is the capture-based aquaculture. And I will do that when I cover here, my next slide to be, what the various challenges are. And I will identify that capture-based aquaculture is one of the challenges that we're trying to solve today in moving towards better practices in aquaculture. So Dominic already mentioned about habitat degradation and problems with habitat if we don't have good practices. And he also mentioned food safety, which the AFFS is a particular example that he gave. But I'm going to focus on the third bullet, which is the biological sustainability, because we also have to pay attention to this to make sure we have populations of wild animals into the future. And those populations will help us in turn with our aquaculture. Remember, capture fishery and aquaculture are not completely separate. They're very interlinked, and therefore the health of both sectors is very interlinked. So I'm going to talk about two components, feed and seed. And you may remember from Alex's talk that he mentioned that both feed and seed are part of the assessment process. We look at both in the assessment process for species. And I will only very briefly look at feed, because I think probably most people who deal with aquaculture have some idea that this is quite a challenge. In other words, finding enough food or feed for the fish or the invertebrates to grow when they're in captivity, when they're being cultured. Now, for certain kinds of aquacultured species, the feed that they need to grow comes from the wild. It comes from capture fisheries. And the kinds of species that need wild fish, the protein that comes from wild fish to enable them to grow, are the carnivorous species, the kind of fish-eating species, which are also some of the high-value species that a lot of us are familiar with. So that includes shrimp, tuna, salmon, groupers, croakers, lobster, etc. These depend to a large extent on access to protein from wild populations. And the photos here just show some of the places we visited in Vietnam and mainland China, which where the volumes of feed are enormous. This feed component is actually causing some ecosystem damage in the South China Sea region. And so this clearly is not sustainable. We will need in future to move to a more sustainably produced type of feed for these animals. But I want to focus for the last part of the talk on the seed part, which is the second component. And when we get to the next slide, I'll be talking about the seed, which are effectively if we could go back Yes, thank you. Effectively, the seed, what I'm referring to as the seed, are the juveniles or the small fish or invertebrates caught from the wild. They're not hatchery produced, and they are the things that are used for ranching or grow out. These are the kind of terms that are commonly used. Because the seed are wild caught, they need to be managed just like any other wild caught capture fishery for sustainability. So now I'm ready for the next slide. And the next slide just shows you a series of examples of species that will be very familiar. These are species like eels, lobster, grouper, tuna, shrimp, snapper. A lot of these are carnivorous, and much of their aquaculture depends on catching wild seed. Not all of it by any means. There is some hatchery production of things like grouper, for example, but many of the species that we value particularly depend to some extent, if not a very large extent or exclusively, on wild caught seed. So this is very much a sustainability issue. I'm going to finish by using, with the next slide please, thank you, one example. It's already been mentioned, the leopard coral grouper. This is part of the live reef food fish trade. Hong Kong is the global center. It's a small volume trade, maybe about 25,000 metric tons a year, but extremely valuable, estimated at about 1 billion, that's a B, billion US dollars a year at retail. So small volume, high value. And one of the high value species is this coral trout, which I think many of you will be familiar with. So the example, the specific example I end on is that of the production of coral trout from the Philippines. And the Philippines is one of the major sources that we get our coral trout from in Hong Kong, and that goes into mainland China. Historically and originally, fishermen would go out and they would capture market-sized fish. So they caught the adults, they would keep them maybe for a couple of days, pack them, send them to Hong Kong, and that's where our fish came from, if they were bought from the Philippines. However, with overfishing, in other words, taking too many of these fish, the populations, the natural populations of fish could not replenish themselves. And so there were fewer and fewer large fish, fewer and fewer adults being available for the fishery. And so what happened was, instead of beginning to manage the fishery, introducing a minimum size to protect juveniles, which would happen in most fisheries, what happened was a fishery was promoted to capture the small fish, the seed, the juveniles I'm talking about, put them in a net cage and grow them out to market size. And now about 70% of the total production of this species, the leopard coral trout from the Philippines, comes from this grow out. Hatchery production is possible, but the taste is not so good, the color's not so good, and therefore the price is not so good. So we did some studies, and the reason how we know what the story I'm telling you is we did studies with fishermen over a number of years in the Philippines, and their experience of the size of the fish that they were catching is illustrated here, from 500 grams to 200 grams, and now even smaller. And the next slide. And so what has happened is some of these very smaller fish in the picture on the right, but the middle or the cage on the left, the capture of these young fish is increasing, and what the concern in the Philippines is, unless this is managed sustainably, you know, with a fishery management plan, which is possible to do, then the populations will continue to decline, because if there are no juveniles to become adults, there are no adults to reproduce and replenish the population. So there are good standards that can be followed, both from the aquaculture point of view and also from the fishery point of view, in capture-based aquaculture. So if we just go to the last slide, and sustainable aquaculture is made up of several components, economic, social, and ecological. And under that ecological component, we need to have sustainable management of seed and feed fisheries. And then maybe, Aaron, if you just flick through the last 5 slides, which I will not cover. These are part of a supplementary material. If you request a copy of this slide show, you will have access to definitions about sustainable aquaculture, examples of codes of good practice, etc. So quite a lot of work has been done to facilitate a sort of a better approach to these kinds of capture-based aquaculture. Jackie, that's it from me. Thank you very much.
Brilliant. Thank you, Yvonne. Very, very nice. Thank you. And always wonderful to have you speaking on our panels. You give such a wealth of experience and in-depth knowledge on particular subjects, and capture-based aquaculture is one of those. So thank you always for being a part of our panel. Okay, and now I'm going to hand over to Jose, our last but certainly not least speaker of the day. And Jose, he already mentioned he has huge expertise, but one area as well, as we're going to find out now, is very much Barramundi. And Jose helped to peer review quite a few of our species profiles on our website. So he's been an incredibly valuable resource for us. So please go ahead, Jose.
Okay, thank you very much, Jackie. So in my presentation here today, I will introduce the culture farming of Barramundi, also known as Asian sea bass, and just touch base on red snapper culture and what they look like, and how there are so many species that we call red snapper. But starting up, let's see. Next slide. Seem I don't have control. Help me with the next slide. So here it is. This is the one. Okay, this is the Barramundi, as it's called. It's an Aboriginal name in Australia, which means large-scale river fish, and it's probably one of the most iconic fish for Australians and the Aborigine. So next slide. The next slide, please. Okay, so what I find very special about this species is that, different from most of other marine food fish species, is that it's very tough. It's very resistant because it's life history. So it can be farmed in fully fresh water. As you see, there are some ponds. It can be farmed in sea cages. It can be farmed intensively in raceway systems, and now more and more into what we call RES systems, which is recirculating aquaculture systems. So you can this way bring the farming very close to the consumer markets, close by in bigger cities, and having them in sheds, for instance, in any type of salinity. What I also find special about Barramundi is that it has a very good market acceptance and value, like Professor Yvonne mentioned, that in Hong Kong the volume of very high priced species, it is just overwhelming, and I still don't understand why it is doesn't seem to be as much appreciated in Hong Kong as it is in other parts of the world, in Australia, for instance. And I think perhaps it's about having the chef preparing it well. I don't know how to answer that question. But touching base here, looking at the global production, it has been on the rise. So there is definitely increasing market demand for it. And this graph only goes until 2013, where aquaculture production, you see, has been increased a lot and almost reaching fisheries production. But now it has actually surpassed. So aquaculture of Barramundi continues to increase, and you can see here global total production has gone over 100,000 metric tons. So who produces barramundi? Where is it produced? Well, it's mainly in Southeast Asia where it's native to. So actually what we can see in different colors in the globe here in Southeast Asia and Australia, it is where it is captured from fisheries and also farmed. And now farming is being expanded to places like even Europe and US with these recirculating systems. So let's see, next slide. Who are the major producers? And number one is Malaysia, then followed by Taiwan, Thailand, and then Indonesia, Australia at lower production volumes. But again, it's mainly Taiwan. And so one important thing for the growth of the culture of barramundi is that after a lot of R&D over the last 3 decades, we know how to breed it very reliably, and seed is available any time of the year and very high quality seed. And it's one of the first tropical marine food species that has gone through some genetic improvement programs. So what is also known, which is not the case for many of the species consumed in Hong Kong, even farmed in Hong Kong, is that the hatchery management, how that means, how to breed them to produce good quality eggs and take those eggs up to the fingerling. It's a very well-known process, which makes it the availability of seed is 12 months of the year. So definitely, this is not the case of having to rely on capture of seeds from the wild, because they are easily obtained. I'll pass through water quality requirements. It is similar to any other tropical species, and other things like the feeds are well known, and now there's more and more research on how to remove the fish meal and fish oil components of the feed to replace with more sustainable plant-based, insect meal-based, other terrestrial proteins. So the whole technological package on the biology and how to culture it, it's well known. So what is to research further? Well, with this expansion of farming, every farmer, if you ask them what's the #1 issue they have, well, can say, perhaps the price is not the price they would like it to be. But today it's about disease. Disease spreads very easily in water. So from one farm to the next, or from one pond or sea cage to the next, there's so many different pathogens that could be. So our focus of our research is how to produce let's say a genetically improved species, the same way that we have done with beef, with chicken, with all of the vegetables that we eat. They have been bred, so we select which one is the best, have the best farming attributes. So this is the next step. And for barramundi, we have already a few different lines of improved fish for higher growth, and we're going towards disease resistance now. So I'll just pass briefly. The market price is stable. However, I think for any other species, it is important to know how to sell it well and avoid the middleman. So the same species may be found for $5, let's say here in Singapore, in the market for $53 with good advertising. So considerations for this species in Hong Kong. Well, like I said, the biology and culture aspects are known, and it's a very robust fish. It is difficult to die like other species, like Pompano, for instance. It's much more susceptible. Barramundi acceptance is increasing in mainland China, and so there's demand is increasing. One consideration is that it is still a carnivore species, even though the fish meal levels have been decreasing over the last years. But it's not species like carps, tilapia, or jade perch, silver perch that are more vegetarians and don't require so much. So the feed price is a little bit more expensive. The other thing is that, as with any other tropical species like the grouper cobia, tilapia, and shrimp, the Hong Kong winter is too cold for the good growth rates in winter. But there's production strategies on how to overcome that. But in one way or another, for tropical species, the window of time is limited in Hong Kong, but farmers have managed to avoid that. And again, for small farmers, they need to target like premium markets, avoid middlemen, and how to commercialize it differently. Otherwise, it may not be worth to farm barramundi in Hong Kong. So this was just a brief introduction on barramundi. I could speak here for a few hours, but I was asked to talk briefly about red snappers. So what about snappers? What do we know about their farming? Well, it is when we talk about red snappers, there are several species which we categorize as red snappers. Here is a few different found in different places around Singapore, but you can see here I listed a number of different red snappers. So they look very similar, but actually the species are different to each other. So in this way, it makes it much harder to manage. Many times the farmers don't know exactly what species they have, and there's not much known in terms of the how to really differentiate in terms of genome. There's very little information about them. But like I said, the interest in farming has been increasing it because it just looks, as a beautiful red colored fish. And in Singapore, the Singapore Food Agency and their station at the Marine Aquaculture Center in St. John Island, they have been successfully closing the hatchery production of the snappers. But it is a much more challenging fish to raise compared to barramundi, for instance. And new projects are coming up to try to better understand how we farm red snapper. The price is higher than barramundi, and just to show here in this slide a couple of examples of new farms in Singapore which are getting away from the traditional sea cage farming system. So what they're doing, they're building tanks within barges and pumping the water, doing water treatment first before it goes into the fish. So to avoid, filter pollutants out and control the environment, they this fish will get, and also they treat the water before the water is released back to the environment. And I think it is this is the future of where aquaculture will go, because it can be farmed on the sea, but with more thinking and better control to move away from the traditional sea cage farming, which is very vulnerable to diseases mainly. All right, so this was my and this ends my brief talk. Thank you for following, and I'll pass it on to Jackie again.
Thank you so much, Jose. Really nice to get some couple of profiles there of two fish species of interest to the Hong Kong market. It certainly came up as one of the fish species. The Barramundi one that our members were keen on. One member in particular said, can we talk about it? And red snapper also increasing interest for Hong Kong market. Okay, so what we're going to do now is we're going to call all of our speakers back. This is the question and answers session. So please, everyone, put your questions into the chat box. You'll see there's a chat box function there. You just have to click on the arrow. It should open up and you can type in your question. And I will read that out for the speakers, or if there's anything in relation to the seafood risk assessment website or the project, then I'm also happy to answer that. So while people are hopefully putting in questions, please do put your questions in. I've also got a couple of questions I want to ask some of the panelists. And in terms of, well, this question first is for Dominic at the AFCD. So Dominic, your presentation showed us that currently the AFFS certified farms make up around 23% of Hong Kong's cultured area. So I would love to hear, what is the plan to increase this to perhaps 100% coverage one day? Is that a possibility? And how can the private sector in Hong Kong be of help in this? So the seafood traders in Hong Kong, how can they help out?
Okay, thanks very much for those two questions. In response to your first question about the cultured area in Hong Kong, what we at the AFCD are doing, we're continuously exploring ways that we can increase the productivity of cultured fish in the fish farms. So I explained earlier on in the presentation that we do this by way of a modeling system where we model the productivity and the environmental acceptability at each of the fish culture zones that we operate in. And we see, if we identify a site as being underproductive or underutilized, then we might, conversely, a site that is being overutilized, then we might adjust the quotas or the distribution of fish farms accordingly based on this data. What we are also doing is we are also exploring the possibility of increasing the number of fish culture zones. So there are currently 4 fish culture zones that are under review and proposed to be designated fish culture zones under the Marine Fish Culture Ordinance. And it is anticipated that by increasing the number of fish culture zones, we could then encourage more fish farms to take up aquaculture farming and to also participate in the AFFS fish farm scheme. For existing fish farms, what we are also doing is, for those who have not registered for the scheme yet, is we are, we visit fish farms on a regular basis around Hong Kong, and we try to present to them the benefits and opportunities that await them if they join the AFFS scheme. And as part of the work at the AFCD, we look at marketing and promotional opportunities for these farms to incentivize them to join the scheme. And in response to your second question, and that was about the can you remind me? Sorry.
Private sector, how the private sector can help out. So the seafood traders in Hong Kong, how they can be of help, the demand perhaps of the AFFS. So remember, you were saying there's 2 key channels that products are sold in Hong Kong with the AFFS logo, that's through either yourself, your own department, no, directly from the farmers themselves, or the FMO?
Yeah. So what the private sector could do really is, we understand that they have procurement, many corporations, they have their own seafood procurement strategies or procurement policies. One way that they could, assist in the development of local aquaculture produce, or boosting the local aquaculture produce and sustainable produce offered under the scheme, is they could incorporate or integrate, AFFS products into their procurement strategies, or work towards a roadmap where this could be done in the years or months or years to come, really. So the AFFS products are sold, we sell them directly to consumers, but we also sell them to businesses. So if you're a business, we would encourage you to look at, the benefits of procuring AFFS products, and as consumers, how you can also, adjust your buying habits to, to tailor it around local produce, and to have peace of mind, really, when you purchase AFFS products.
Okay, very nice. Thanks, Dominic. And let's hope that we will see some increased uptake in AFFS following this webinar. I know that AFCD are trying to work on increasing awareness locally in campaigns, right? Or perhaps even in supermarkets. I think you said that you're trying to increase awareness of the AFFS logo at one point.
Yeah, we have a range of.
Oh, you're on mute, Dominic.
Oh, sorry.
You're back on mute.
Sorry. Can you hear me now, or?
Okay, I think Dominic's sound is maybe cut off for some reason. But I've got another question here. If that's fine, Dominic, we can come back on that point. I wanted to ask a question now to Yvonne on CPA. One of the things that we picked up during the risk assessment work, we worked also with spiny lobster experts, also from James Cook University, and it became very obvious the linkage between wild capture and farmed. But what also we managed to dig up and we found was actually that the situation wasn't always too dire. In Indonesia, for example, the regulations are so strict on aquaculture now that many producers have stopped producing, but now that's subsequently changing as well. So the regulations appear to be strong in Indonesia, which bodes well for going forward, not necessarily the case in Vietnam that we saw. I would be interested to find out on CBA in general, what other perhaps positive stories have you been seeing? So any examples of well-managed CBA operations in the region?
Okay, thank you, Jackie. That's a really good question.
You're also on mute, Yvonne. You just got to unmute yourself.
No, I can
on the
hear
little panel on the right-hand side.
Jackie, we can hear it. Maybe
so there's a mute button.
We can hear Jackie.
So should I continue?
Yes, please do. Please do.
Yes.
Yvonne.
Okay, thank you.
Oh no, we can't hear you. Gosh, I'm wondering why everyone.
Yes, we can.
Oh, you can hear.
We can. Yeah.
I'm the only one who can't hear you. What?
I think
that's so strange. Aaron, can you sort out that system for me?
I'll tell you later. I'll tell you later.
Go ahead, Yvonne. You go ahead.
It's a good question. So it's very interesting. It's a fishery. Capture-based aquaculture is a fishery, and there's absolutely no reason why it cannot be managed as a fishery. Looking at how much can be taken each year, maybe looking at sizes, mortality rates. So in principle, there's no reason why CBA fisheries that supply the seed and the fingerlings can't be managed. I think I will answer your question with an example, but I think there has not been an appreciation of the extent to which fingerlings and wild seed are taken in massive numbers for a few species, that it could actually, and in the case of the coral trout, does have a major impact on the adult population. So we're kind of in a situation where I think there's a growing awareness of CBA and the implications of taking too many wild seed from the wild on sustainability. So in answer to your question, the very nice example of the Western Australian lobster, I'm not completely up to date with the management, but there has been a history where the fishery for the little ones, let's call them the little baby seed lobster, has been managed differently from the fishery for the adults. So there are fishermen who will just catch adults, there are fishers who will just take the small ones, but they're not disconnected. A fishery plan in the past has actually taken account of the capture of the very small ones, the seed, and a capture of the adults, and put everything together, so to speak, in a pot and said, well, what can this population in this region, what can it sustain in terms of annual fishery capture? So I think certainly that to me is a good example of how you could do this. And I think that as more people become aware of the extent to which capture-based aquaculture is supplying some of these very valuable species, I think we're going to see more of that. And just adding one point to that, even if, as in the case of the coral trout that I gave you, even if you can hatchery produce a species, if it's cheaper or easier to go and get the seed, that will still be done. So just because you end up producing something with a hatchery does not necessarily mean you stop the capture. So I think we should just use, a bigger lens, so to speak, and look more in detail. But there's no reason why these CBAs can't be managed like other fisheries. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Yvonne. Excellent. I'm just sensing now we're running out of time here before the system will log us off. Unfortunately, we haven't had a chance to have Alex or Jose answering any questions, but I see that we've had no key questions coming through from the chat box, so that's fine.
Sorry, Jackie.
But I just want to say a very warm thank you to all of the panelists for being here today, also for all of the time spent in the build up to this. There's a lot of time and effort that went into that, and also for your big support to the seafood risk assessment project over the period of a year that we've been working on this. So thank you very, very much to all of you. And what we'll do now, Aaron, I'll just ask you to change the slide so we can quickly finish off on our final notice for everybody who's still on the webinar. We will be planning future webinars in the future. We haven't identified the subjects yet, but that will all be revealed in early 2021. And perhaps, Aaron, if we can just show the final slide with the Sustainable Seafood Risk Assessment website again.
One moment, Jackie.
Okay.
I've got one question here that I'd like to put to Alex. I think it's an important one to ask, and especially for those who've tuned in today. It's asking, what is the difference between the risk assessment website and that of WWF's Sustainable Seafood Guide? So maybe, Alex, if you could speak on that for a minute before we close.
Yeah, that's a really good question. So when we were developing...
I seem to be having a few problems with my sounding. Go ahead, Aaron, you go ahead. You take over.
Alex, please.
Thanks. Yeah, so when we were developing the risk assessment method, we did consult with WWF and we did look at their seafood guide as well. So I think there's a lot of connections there. So I think going forward, we'd certainly look to collaborate with other organisations working out in Hong Kong, particularly in terms of sharing information, just in terms of efficient manage of resources and things. So
Aaron, is there anything else from your side? No? Okay, we're still waiting.
Alex, go ahead.
I don't know what's happening with the connection, but
gosh, go ahead, Aaron. I can't seem to see anything on the system, so you please go ahead and ask the questions that you're seeing. Okay, good. I'm going to turn myself on mute.
Right. Okay. Yeah, I was just saying, I think it definitely makes sense to collaborate with other organisations in Hong Kong in terms of sharing information. The key thing why we developed, again, going to the context of why we developed this, was obviously that translation piece to ensure that information did align with the Hong Kong SSC codes of sourcing code of conduct as well, just to make sure things are just really easily understood by businesses using the tool, and it aligns with their commitments to the Hong Kong SSC Code of Conduct. So hopefully that answers the question, Aaron.
Thanks very much, Alex. And for everybody else who was with us through those technical difficulties, I've seen that there are several questions that we have been posed. And what we'll do after this webinar is that we'll put them to the speakers in email, and we'll collect the responses, and then we'll share them with all the registrants from this webinar. So thank you very much for everybody for tuning in today. And just before I head off, if you'd like to get involved with the seafood or the Hong Kong Sustainable Seafood Coalition, you can join our members who are on screen at the minute by dropping us an email at info@hkssc.org. Get in contact with us through our LinkedIn page as well, and we're happy to do an introductory call with you to let you know what the coalition is about and help to onboard you. Lastly then, I'll just finish with this, the Seafood Risk Assessment website. The purpose of today's webinar, in addition to hearing those insights from our different panelists today, if you log onto this website, you'll get to see the full functionality that Alex was sharing today. And yes, please provide your feedback to us and to Alex at RS Standards. These slides will be shared with everybody who registered today. And if you don't want any further information, please do message info@hkssc.org. With that, thank you all for joining, and we'll hope to see you at the next webinar. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Aaron.
Thank you, speakers.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Cheers. Bye-bye.